GreenTawk Podcast, episode number 5. Hello and welcome to the GreenTawk Podcast, a podcast dedicated to, we're going to find out what it's dedicated to. We're trying to figure that out now, but today we're going to talk all about Occupy Wall Street and sustainability because we're trying to be topical with the show, and that is coming up right now. Welcome, my name is David Doucette. I'm coming to you from my studio in Santa Monica, California, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Eric Corey Freed out there in Palm Springs, California, who gave me explicit instructions to say his name and not throw it to him because he doesn't like saying his own name.
Well, I don't like the stress of throwing it to me. It just creates anxiety for me, I think.
Well, you're the one that had to add, 3 names to your name.
Well, with good reason.
All right, so today, one of the things we talked about was finding a focus for the show, an audience for the show, and I think we have a good topic today: Occupy Wall Street and sustainability. And what made you pick that topic?
I've been, I'm a lifelong environmentalist, I think, and like anyone in the movement, you see the different waves that environmentalism has gone through. And I really identify it in kind of 3 chunks. There was the first big chunk, the Rachel Carson Silent Spring chunk that kind of kicked it off, and then 30 years of trying to make people feel guilty for their actions. Then the last 10 years have really been much more productive because we've been focused on business. We've been focused on return on investment. We've been making the economic case for sustainability and green buildings in general. That's been just the last 10 years. And now that I feel that's shifting again, and now it's really focused on survival. And I think this process, this catharsis, is I think it's probably common to a lot of movements. And I've just been thinking that the sustainability movement could learn a lot by looking at other movements that have succeeded in the past. And I think Occupy Wall Street could learn a lot by learning from the mistakes of the sustainability movement. So I'm not quite sure where this is going yet. I've just been thinking about it quite a bit, and I've got a lot to say. But I as always, I guess I want to hear your thoughts on it too.
It's interesting to me, and I was actually just checking out the OccupyWallStreet.org website, and it started on September 17th down in Liberty Square in downtown Manhattan. And it was inspired by the popular uprisings in Egypt and Tunisia and the whole Arab Spring thing. And I guess, to me, it really caught me by surprise. I wasn't one to sort of follow it immediately, and but then it started to take hold, and then it's for real, and now it's been more than a month. And I was looking on their website this morning. They have a whole bunch of dates into January. I mean, they plan on, it sounds like, being there for a while. And I was just reading the other day that Mayor Bloomberg, sounds like some of the businesses down in the Wall Street area, the small business owners seem to be, I guess, losing a little patience, to put it lightly, because I guess it's affecting their business some way, somehow.
Yeah, and they're using the occupiers sometimes are using their bathrooms and coming in and stealing beverages, and the thing is, it's cold in New York in January. I don't know how this movement's going to continue through the winter. It's one thing if you're occupying San Francisco or occupying Oakland, where it's pretty temperate, but I don't know. I was just in Portland on Friday, and I went past the Occupy Portland movement, and like all things Portland, it was very hipster and outdoorsy, and there were a lot of tents. And it kind of, my first reaction was that it looked like a Hooverville, if you remember the old Hoovervilles of the early 30s.
Right.
not that we're old enough to remember them, but you know, you remember in history books, and that's what it felt like in a way. But it kind of a modern day equivalent. And I think like you, I was a little dubious of the Occupy movement when it started, simply because I remember protesting against the Iraq War in 2003, and in San Francisco, which was the largest protest in the history of the U.S. And nothing happened. Nothing came of it. And I remember feeling very deflated and very defeated after that.
How long was that protest?
It was a series of marches along Market Street, and they were doing them. At one point, they were doing them every weekend, and you'd go, and it'd be fun, because you felt like you were doing something. But ultimately, when nothing came of it, and we still went to war, I felt very disempowered. Is that a word? I felt very, very deflated, is the kind of the word I kept using. And with the Occupy Wall Street, I was feeling like the same thing was going to happen. Oh, why are they even bothering? You know, nobody's going to listen anyway. And to my surprise and delight, it's really changed the national conversation on it. And it'll only do more as it progresses.
And do you think it is sustainable? Because also on the Occupy Wall Street website, they have a live stream, by the way, that people can go check out too. That it's a leaderless movement, and is it sustainable to have a movement like this without a leader, without sort of a, I guess, clear cut set of demands, or something that is very clear that sort of the opposition can sort of, I guess, respond to?
Well, I think that's the very reason why it's effective. Because let's say Jane Doe stood up and she said, "I'm the leader of this movement." And then suddenly the press would do their usual job of digging into the background. The opposition would spend money to hire detectives to get the skeletons out of her closet, and invariably something would come up. You know, her doing drugs or doing something or being arrested. And people are fallible. And the fact that it's a leaderless movement means that it's technically an infallible movement. There's no one that you can criticize or break down. It's also very much like the internet. There is no head. There is no brain. It's really dispersed throughout the country, and each one is kind of a node, just like on the internet. So what I like with it is that it's a multi-headed hydra. You can't chop off the head because there's none to kill. So it makes the entire Occupy movement rather impervious to criticism.
That's actually a really good point. I'm thinking of, you know, what happened in Egypt and in Tunisia, and of course when the mission, I guess, for the movement was to say bring democracy to these areas. We don't have quite that mission here because we already have democracy. So I wonder. I know we want change in sort of the financial sort of markets and the top 1% of people who are, you know, deciding a lot of our fate. But how is it going to move? How is it going to continue to sustain itself and move forward? Because fighting for democracy at its core is a very, very big thing to fight for. Like it's
very, very abstract too,
and very abstract.
If you think about it, demands are already starting to emerge. So on Saturday, November 5th, is the Move Your Money Out of the Banks Day. And there's a website, and I don't know who put it together, but there's an actual website to move your money out of banks and into credit unions, get it out of corporate control. So if you're with Chase or Citibank or Bank of America or Wells Fargo, the idea is that you would essentially, it's the moveyourmoneyproject.org. Okay. Is the website. And to be honest with you, I'm going to do it. And I want to do it on the 5th when everybody else is doing it. So it's almost like I'm making a vote. I'm casting a vote in this. If I do it on the 4th or the 6th, it probably won't register as much as doing it on that same day. Right. So there is a power to that. And that's kind of the first tangible actionable demand that I've seen out of them. There's been, just to kind of backtrack a bit before we get too far, I've been reading, like everybody else, I've been reading the Steve Jobs biography,
Right.
right?
Right.
And because I'm a nerd, and uh, in there was a quote uh, from Buckminster Fuller, who's one of my idols, and just a brilliant visionary engineer, architect, doer, and in the quote, Buckminster Fuller says, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." The quote is in reference to Steve Jobs creating the Macintosh, creating this new paradigm of computers. But now I'm starting to see this quote attributed more and more to the Occupy movement. Just standing up and saying we don't like existing reality, fighting existing reality, is only going to get them so far. To really make change, they need to create a new model. They need to present an alternative that is more appealing. So I think these demands, or whatever you call them, are gonna emerge pretty soon.
You think so? I hope so, because that's sort of the I think that's the next step to keep the movement moving forward. And one of the things that I think is interesting is, if you watch some of this on the internet, and I haven't been following this closely, but catching, pictures of a woman holding up a sign saying, I'm not a weird person. I'm a mom with a baby and the whole 9 yards. So the point, I think, and what is unique about Wall Street is, or the Occupy Wall Street, it's people like you and I and very regular people. It's not hippies or necessarily, or like, there's not one demographic that I think you can pigeonhole into the whole movement.
Thank God.
Right.
And I think that was the fundamental difference with the Iraq War protests in 2003, was that generally it was young, college, hippie-ish people, um, kind of out there protesting. This, you go to you go through these Occupy movements, and there's families, and there's children, and there's old people, and from all walks of life. I mean, they really are the 99%. It's everybody except, what you don't see is, you don't see guys in $3,000 Brooks Brothers suits. You don't see that, but everybody else seems to be represented.
Right. And let's tie this into sustainability, and I guess the sustainability movement, which has had its up and downs over the course of several years. And in fact, I just thought of this just right now. I read the other day that I can't remember. I probably should have researched this guy's name. You may know the report, but basically, the non-believers of global warming funded this research, and basically the guy has come to say that there is global warming. Do you remember? Or?
Yeah, yeah. It was. Let me get his name. He essentially was a denier, and one whose work was funded by the Koch brothers. And the Koch brothers are a $700 billion company that nobody's ever heard of. But the Koch brothers they're essentially the creators of the Tea Party movement.
Okay.
They funded that whole thing. They put the whole thing together. The Koch brothers have been, last year they spent $73 million trying to convince people that climate change doesn't exist. They're evil. Charles and David Koch are the twin multi-billionaire brothers. They're the tied for the ninth richest Americans in the ninth richest people in the world, and nobody's ever heard of them, or very few people have heard of them. The Koch brothers funded this scientist out of Berkeley, who conveniently named his project, I think it was FACT, which is an acronym for something.
And it was like a $20 million research project or something like that. I mean, it wasn't a little thing.
Yeah, and the wonderful part of it was that Richard Muller.
Yes.
So the wonderful part was that this Dr. Richard Muller said, "Bah humbug! I'm distrustful of other scientists' calculations. I'm going to make my own." That was what he really said. He didn't deny the whole thing. He just said, "I never trust other scientists' calculations." And he went off and got funded by the Koch brothers, who were more than happy to have him as a denier. And
Right.
in the end, last week, he releases his report, and he's like, actually, you know what? Their science, their numbers are right on, with a few exceptions, but it's pretty right on, and it's really much worse than I thought. So kudos for him.
And
For
do we know the Koch brothers' response?
No, but he called it was a 2-year project, and he called it the Berkeley Earth Surface Temperature Project, or
Okay.
BEST,
Okay.
because he wanted to be the best. And as if the 200 scientists in the UN panel for climate change wasn't enough, he wanted to do it on his own, and he did, and it was good for him, for
Yeah.
doing that. But if you notice, the environmental movement and the Occupy movement have those similarities. They both are leaderless. They both are somewhat vague in their demands, and their demands could be misconstrued. You hear, I've been watching alternative viewpoints on it, and you hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, the Occupy people, they just want us to do away with capitalism." No, they want to do away with capitalism being involved in politics and corrupting that system. So there's a lot that can be misunderstood by it, and I feel the same way in the environmental movement. I have people, they yell at me at talks. You hate business. It's like, I love business. I just wish business wasn't so corrupt and evil and controlling and taking advantage of their wealth to skirt regulations.
And it is true because I think whether it's Occupy Wall Street, which by the way, according to the website, is happening in over 100 cities, which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
Hmm.
I think sometimes like Occupy Wall Street or the environmentalists or us environmentalists, outsiders look at that and think like we're extremists. And it's like all or nothing. And I don't think it's the case in either Occupy Wall Street or environmentalists. It's not an all or nothing existence.
No, and that's why I've said for years that the hippie movement was probably the worst thing to happen to the environmental movement. This idea that the hippies scare off people like my mother-in-law, who probably share a lot of those same values and a lot of those opinions. But I mean, she said this to me. Ugh, I don't want to wear patchouli and hemp, and it's like, well, you don't have to do that. That's not part of it.
Right.
And I'm hearing kind of the same perceptions about Occupy as well. I don't want to. I'm not a hippie, and I don't want to eat beans out of a can and sit in the rain. And okay, well, you don't have to do that. There's other things you can do, and that's why I like this moveyourmoneyproject.org, where you can, this Saturday, November 5th, move to a credit union, a bank that works for you, instead of using their money to lobby Congress.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Make sure actually you put that link in the show notes. That's a good one.
Will do.
And it is funny too when you think about all of this going on, and then Bank of America a couple of weeks coming out and saying, or a couple of weeks ago coming out that they're going to charge people $5, for their ATM, for their debit cards, which is just ridiculous.
I love the swift reaction from the public. I love that their stock dropped 7% the very next day.
Right.
And so not only did they lose money, but then they quickly saw that public opinion was not in their favor, and it was instantaneous. And suddenly I'm feeling empowered again. I'm feeling like maybe we do have somewhat of a say in this democracy.
Well, I think with the power of the internet, I think we do. And a friend was just telling me the other day, Chase. I hadn't heard this, but Chase has made the decision that they're not going to charge users for the debit cards. And I guess they were testing it in some markets or whatever. But I would imagine some of that is a result of the public outcry when Bank of America tried it. And not that it's the same thing as Netflix, but when companies do something that they're not thinking it through. I mean, people have power, and people have the internet. People can share very quickly, and as there's no more Quickster. Netflix just sent on a email, I guess, in the last few weeks. Remember, they were going to split from Netflix was just going to stream only, and Quickster was going to do the DVD rental. Well, Quickster is now dead, and now it's still going to be all Netflix, and I think they're still trying to figure it all out.
And yeah, well, we could talk an hour just about Reed Hastings and his decision-making ability. But the Netflix, if you think about it, there have been some huge PR bungles in the last 6 months. that'll probably go down in history as some of the biggest. The Netflix Quickster debacle is one of them. I think this Bank of America ATM fee is another, and and it's almost as if the corporations are so they're on the ropes. I mean, it almost feels like that they're acutely aware that they're now being scrutinized in a way that they they should have been before but haven't been.
Do you
And
do you
I think the Occupy movement has something to do with it.
do you think the corporations are watching what's going on with the Occupy movement, or do you think they're sort of business as usual?
Oh no, I definitely think that they're aware of it. I mean, I've just seeing what other CEOs have been saying and reacting, and a lot of them have been deliberately trying to avoid getting caught up in it because they don't want the scrutiny. But the thing is, I still think there's some shoe that is going to have to drop in order for it to take off. So you had mentioned the Arab Spring comparison before, and I think it's an apt one. But really, the Arab Spring galvanized around the abuse of a single individual in Tunisia.
Okay.
I forget his name, but the gentleman who got burns on 80% of his body from police brutality.
Right.
Simply because he didn't want to surrender his cart to a police officer, and that image galvanized Tunisia and ultimately galvanized Iran and Iraq. Well, that's what hasn't occurred yet on American soil. Nobody's died yet, and I hate to sound jaded about it, but it almost seems like somebody needs to get hurt. And this was reiterated with Thomas Friedman's speech at the Greenbuild conference in Toronto that we talked about before. He said this isn't a revolution. He said when you have BP causing the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history and essentially getting off scot-free, that's not a revolution. When you have Exxon raking in the largest profits of any corporation, when people are critical of them, that's not a revolution. It's a party. Have you ever seen a revolution where nobody's ever gotten hurt? Somebody's going to have to get hurt, really. And that's kind of the sad part. That's the part I feel like I'm waiting for.
Well, and it is too. I wonder because I know I was just reading. I think we were just sharing this actually, but Bloomberg and the city of New York is sort of, I guess, waiting. I don't know if I'd say waiting patiently, but they're obviously watching Occupy Wall Street and all of that. And it begs the question: is this going to stay peaceful? Because as we know, what happened in Oakland a week or so ago, I don't know if what is happening or what happened in Oakland fuels the movement more, or if it causes it to sort of, or if it hurts it a little bit, because then it takes it into, or makes it appear like now it's not a nonviolent protest anymore. I don't know.
It definitely seemed to make an impact. It's a shame that it happened in Oakland, which is already known as a hostile city, as opposed to if it happened in a more unexpected place. Because I almost think that people outside of Oakland could dismiss it. Oh, the people in Oakland are nuts, or whatever.
Right. I guess it's just sort of in people's minds. It's easier to write off because they'll say that like that's Oakland.
Right.
So now, do you think with the sustainability, because I think the sustainability movement is probably, we could say, is at a crossroads maybe a little bit, and we talked about this when we talked about the Greenbuild Expo that you went to. It was their 10th year anniversary, but there was no hoopla about it. There was no sort of looking back at the past 10 years because, maybe there wasn't a whole lot that they wanted to look back. They wanted to move forward,
It was kind of strange to go to the 10th anniversary conference and there be almost no fanfare about. I was expecting some video montage of a look at the last 10 years. They didn't do any of that, which is fine. Why have the sentimentality? Let's look forward. And really, the focus of the entire conference was next. That was the official theme of the conference. And it seemed that all of the topics, including the one that I spoke on, was really focused on the future. I think for most of us, we're almost like, okay, we've gotten everybody up to a certain level of understanding with sustainability, And I think the Occupy movement has gotten everybody up to a certain level of understanding with corporate malfeasance. And now, okay, what's next? And the Occupy movement is moving much, much faster because it's involving many, many more people. Obviously, it's affecting 99% of us. So I think you're going to see the Occupy movement leaps and bounds ahead of the sustainability movement. But I think in one sense, the goals of both movements are very tied together.
That is a good point, and they are. It is interesting, the whole Green Build Next thing, and maybe they were onto something, because I think that's what Occupy Wall Street is about. I mean, because a lot of us, we're done living sort of the last 5-6 years. We've been through it, and we're ready for the next thing. We don't need to look back. It's like we want change, and what has been working, what has created a lot of profit for these corporations, and forgotten about sort of the middle class a little bit. People are done with that, so I think we are ready for next, whether it's the Occupy Wall Street movement or the green or the sustainability movement. I like that analogy.
And if you really think about it, we need to change how the one percenters and corporations in general have been treating the environment in order for us to meet our goals. It's been the last kind of threshold, and just in the last 3 years, we're suddenly seeing clean energy groups lobbying and trying to compete toe to toe with the Exxons and the Koch brothers of the world. So I think it's all coming to a head. And I don't think it's any individual thing. I just think this Occupy movement is part of a greater dissatisfaction about everything. And the sustainability movement is part of that. Because if you really think about it, it's not just about natural sustainability, but cultural sustainability in a certain sense. And I think a lot of the goals are going to be tied together. We're going to need corporations to be much more socially responsible, much more aware of their impact on communities and on the environment and on the economy. And all of those are sustainability principles at heart. So, I've seen kind of preliminary demands. Matt Taibbi from Rolling Stone, who's a great writer, he's been covering the Occupy movement since it started. And just in Rolling Stone last month, he had a great list of things on his Rolling Stone blog about here's what they should ask for, and kind of changing the Sarbanes-Oxley law and changing a bunch of other specific laws that he went through. And I think in truth there's kind of almost a bigger set of, instead of these specific little rule changes, I almost think that there's a specific set of guidelines that we'd want to establish for how moving forward corporations should react if they're going to be part of a community. And maybe that's what we need. And I don't have them enumerated now, but I can start to imagine some. If corporations want the same rights and responsibilities as people, and the Supreme Court has voted that they have those, then they need to act like good citizens, don't they?
They do, and I just read something this morning. I'm going to try and find it. It was something about, I'm scrolling through the headlines here. It wasn't overpaid stars in Hollywood. It was something about the 20 huge corporations basically paid no income tax last year.
Yeah, and those things, what's great about them is that they are sound bites and very effective at getting people pissed off.
Right.
And I've heard the corporate response to why. In fact, Exxon has a whole website explaining why and how they do pay taxes, but it takes a different form, and where their taxes go, which is further proof that the corporations are well aware of what's going on with the Occupy movement. But in truth, it seems it seems strange that these corporations essentially pay next to nothing, if not nothing. And I'm paying, all told, probably 50% of what we bring in is going back out to taxes. And I'm fine to pay my share, but not when these corporations are lobbying Congress to make sure they don't.
Well, and just to even put this in perspective, when I was Reside Architecture Inc. and I was my little C Corp, the state of California, the Employee Development Department, had sent me on numerous times that you're I think they called it like a professional services corporation. And because you're a professional services corporation and you own more than, I think, 50% of the stock or whatever it was, your tax rate is 30% flat. That's it. And I was like, how is like a small corporation supposed to, really survive like that? And here, 30%, like that's it. No negotiation, that's it. Kind of thing. And
Right.
it is. It's nuts. But then these bigger corporations, Now, let's talk about where you see this thing, because I think nobody really knows what's going to happen with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And as you mentioned, January, it's going to start getting cold in these more northern cities. Maybe that'll help San Francisco, and everyone will go from New York and move out to San Francisco for the time being.
No, and if you're in New York, you go to Florida.
Right, exactly.
That's the way it works. You winter in Florida.
Occupy Florida.
Yeah. My parents are in Florida, and there's not much to occupy down there. I can tell you, there's a lot of strip malls and a lot of drugstores. That's
Right.
about it. I don't know. I mean, what happens when when some 20-year-old dies of hypothermia? What happens then to the movement? And I don't want to see that happen, but it's certainly a real possibility.
Well,
If anything, historically, winters have been a catalyst for change, right? Think about the Russian Revolution as a kind of a much bigger example or Napoleon's march on Moscow.
right.
The winters have been a catalyst for change, and maybe the winter coming up will be maybe I'm predicting it, but maybe that will be kind of speed things up in terms of them rallying for a list of demands, or what I'd rather see is a list of kind of almost larger big picture guidelines of how we'd like corporations to act as part of society, or they're not allowed to be in it. Maybe that would be a better way. But I don't know. I've wanted that from sustainability. The sustainability is also a leaderless movement. There are people that have certainly come forward as voices of the movement. I'd like to think of myself, aspiring to that too. But there's no leader of sustainability, and it's too big of a thing for that to happen. But there certainly have been countless examples of the Chernobyl nuclear incident and the Superfund sites in Niagara Falls, New York, and the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland. There've certainly been victims in this environmental movement. And I think Occupy Wall Street will start to gather up more of these victims.
Do you think, as you had mentioned Rolling Stone, and I was just watching the live stream, and there was a gentleman on the live stream basically, trying to speak out to performers and entertainers, and basically saying, we need a theme song for Occupy Wall Street. We want the Bonos of the music world, to step up and get behind us. And it seems like, I guess, at least from what I've been hearing, that hasn't been happening, and maybe that is for the best in some respects, because it I guess, like we were talking earlier, it keeps it a little more leaderless, and it's not, a platform for one or two celebrities or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see why any celebrity would want to stand up and become the face of this just yet. But it's interesting because something very similar happened in I think it was August or September, and it was a decision about the Alaskan tar sands issue, and there were protests outside of the White House urging President Obama not to sign that bill into law, and he did anyway. And hundreds of people got arrested, and it didn't get any news coverage whatsoever. And then suddenly, Daryl Hannah went down there,
Right.
and Bill McKibben, big environmentalist Bill McKibben, went down there, and they both got arrested in front of the White House. And then suddenly it made national news. So I don't know. Maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need some celebrities to start to stand up and do it. But I don't think anybody wants to be the first. There was a headline just on Huffington Post today where what's his name? I forget the actor's name. Who said, "Well, why would I want to? Why would I want to be part of the Occupy movement just so Fox News can rip me apart? I don't want to be scrutinized in that way."
Right.
And I can't really blame him.
Yeah.
So, who knows what'll happen? But the Occupy movement, what's clear is the Occupy movement's not going to go away, just as the sustainability movement's not going to go away. And in both cases, they both changed the dialogue forever about their respective industries, and that's always a good thing.
And they have to, if we're going to continue to sort of exist, here in America and on this planet. I mean, things have to be, the banking industry has to be run differently. Corporations have to do it differently, and
Exactly.
and our attitudes of the environment have to be differently, or be done differently. And they are. I mean, changes are happening. Anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's been a whole series of books in the last 3 years that they're all depressing books, but they're great reads. There's Jeremy Rifkin has a book called The Third Industrial Revolution, which I think really captures what's going on with sustainability and Occupy Wall Street right now, and it's a new book. Paul Gilding has a great book called The Great Disruption, in which he says in the next decade things are going to get so bad with the climate and with the economy that we're gonna move at a speed that we've only seen maybe in World War II. That kind of mobilization of effort and start to transform industries in a matter of years. There's also a book named Hot: Life on Earth for the Next 50 Years by Mark Hartsgaard, which is great, and then James Howard Kunstler, who's awesome, big fan of his, has a book called The Long Emergency, which came out about 5 years ago. They're all depressing. They're all basically saying things are going to get much crappier, and I tend to believe them. But oftentimes hitting rock bottom is what is really going to make change. And I think for the Occupy people, they've really hit rock bottom. They've tried to work in the system and play by the rules, and they've only gotten screwed in the process. And they're frustrated and upset. And I kind of feel the same way. I mean, you and I are small businesses. We're both incorporated, and I can't tell. I'm still paying off 2010 taxes. I mean, it's just unbelievable. uh, why my rate is so high and why GE is paying zero. And
Right.
and if you ask the tax man, he says, he doesn't really answer.
Right.
So, um, they're this isn't going to go away because their frustration isn't going to go away. And until that's resolved, this movement's going to continue.
Well, I think too, and actually put those books you mentioned in the show notes too.
I will.
Maybe we can have a book club. But it's interesting too, and I think one of the reasons why some of this frustration is happening is because, let's face it, whether you were, I think, a Republican or a Democrat in 2008, there was a lot of hope in the country. And, Obama brought a lot of that hope. He created a lot of that hope. He had a Democratic Congress. And when I guess he didn't perform as expected, I mean, he had a huge task. I think that was sort of like the hope everybody was looking for. And when that really hasn't panned out, and nobody expected it to happen overnight, but now it's 2011. We're going into 2012. We're, coming up to new elections. I think people are frustrated by that as well, and a lot of sort of level-minded people, not extremists either way, not the very liberals or the very conservatives, but a lot of those people in the middle that were, I think, a big part of Obama's successful campaign. Those independents, and and so the independents are frustrated, the conservatives are frustrated, the Democrats are frustrated, so we're all frustrated.
What's also interesting is the how different the coverage has been. You had Tea Partiers showing up with shotguns and some pretty racist signs at their movement, and it got widespread coverage on Fox News, and therefore on MSNBC and CNN. And how little coverage this got in the first month of it, September 17th all the way till about October 15th or 17th, was largely ignored by the mainstream media. And there were no crazy people showing up with shotguns and misspelled signs or any of that stuff. I mean, it's a pretty calm, peaceful. I mean, when you go down to one of these Occupy protests, they're not protests. They're more kind of, you feel very like it's a big group hug, really. You could argue in a very cynical way that, well, that's because the mainstream media is corporate run. They're part of the 1%. But in another way, I think also they were afraid to report on it and be the first to report on it.
I think that's a good point, because I remember it was for a month went by before there was really much reporting, and I remember seeing signs or something, I forget, on the internet, but basically not cries, but people saying, report on us, report the movement, tell people about what's going on here. And it seems like the last few weeks that's definitely been happening. And it is a good point. It makes you wonder, are the corporations that are doing this reporting, are they part of the 1%,
But they're run by people that aren't, or they're a lot of the people that work there aren't. I mean, maybe the CEOs are, but
the advertisers,
I'd like to think that the normal people that work there are normal people, but I don't know. I've been bouncing back and forth between just damn cynicism and incredible hope, and I'm getting whiplash in between.
Where are you right now?
Right now, I'm more on the hopeful side, but it's still
okay.
It's still early in the day.
Well, you're getting to talk out. You're getting to talk about your feelings and your emotions here.
Yeah, exactly. I feel much better.
All right. What else?
Okay, great. I think that's that's kind of it. I'll include a lot of these links in the show notes, including all the books, because some of these books are great, and I wouldn't read them all in a row. Maybe read one and then you read something happy and light.
What would you pick? What would be your first pick?
The Great Disruption by Paul Gilding is probably a great one.
Was that the first one you mentioned?
No, the first one is the Third Industrial Revolution by Rifkin.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good. And we'll work on some sort of intro tagline or something to this podcast is evolving. I think our focus is evolving a little bit. And we're trying to find our niche and our space, and we're a couple of green architects trying to figure out where we fit in with this podcasting thing.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Eric, thank you so much. And for everybody else, and you can find us on iTunes. There's a link in the show notes. You can subscribe to us there. And I just ran out of music, so that is going to do it. My name is David Doucette, Eric Corey Freed in Palm Springs, California. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right.
Nice.
Yeah.